Hi everyone, thank you for coming to Socialist Alternative's Climate Assembly. In pre-coronavirus world, today was meant to kickstart a 3-day climate strike, which is the biggest climate strike event so far. Climate activists all around the world have been preparing for this international event and looking forward to fighting against a system that puts profit before the climate and before our health. Now, in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crisis that's marked to be one of the worst in the history of the planet, what climate strikers have been saying is being proven over and over again every single day. The capitalist system is not only incapable of providing for us, its leaders also don't really care about doing so. All they care about is profit, even when it comes at our expense. This lockdown doesn't mean that we can't keep on fighting. In fact, the situation requires us to keep on fighting. Socialist Alternative would like you to help us share this event. So like the stream, comment, start watch parties. Let's try to get as many people as we possibly can to this assembly. And if you want to support us in the fight against capitalism, consider giving us a donation. Even £5 would help us a lot, and you'll find the link in the comments. We have some fantastic speakers today, which I'm personally looking forward to hearing. So first we'll hear from Peter McGregor, who's one of the organisers of the climate strikes in Belfast and a member of our sister organisation in Ireland, the Socialist Party. Much like the climate crisis is a global crisis, the capitalist system is a global system that requires an international fight back and solution. Both of our organisations are part of the International Socialist Alternative, which is an international organisation that's dedicated to fighting against capitalism and for socialism all around the world in over 30 countries. So for example, if you can't tell by my accent, I'm originally from our sister organisation in Israel and Palestine. Next, we'll hear from Sam Moorcroft, who's a UCU member on the role of workers and the trade unions and what role they should play in the fight against the climate catastrophe. And then we'll hear from Kat Rose, who's a climate activist and a member of Socialist Action, which is International Socialist Alternative in Australia. She will speak about the unique situation experienced in the context of the Australian wildfires and as an activist in Melbourne. And finally, we'll hear from Conor Rosamond, who is Socialist Alternative's political committee member, to talk about the ecological aspect of the coronavirus crisis and what program we need to fight climate change. So without further ado, let's hear from Peter about the situation in Northern Ireland.
Very much, Yara. Just as Yara said, I'm Peter McGregor. I am a member of our Socialist Alternative's sister organisation in Ireland. I'm just going to give a bit of a brief report on the sort of climate strikes in Belfast and how we've intervened as socialists. So obviously the climate movement in Ireland has grabbed the attention of vast swathes of people the world over. What started with just one school student, Greta Thunberg, has now moved to become hundreds of thousands of students worldwide. But action has been seen in decades, and it is clear that young people are looking for an alternative and an end to the climate crisis. And as socialists, it is vital that we recognise, how significant this movement is and the potential that it has to develop into something very big and very significant. Just a brief report on, the Belfast strikes. It started small, maybe 20 people at first, mainly organised by one group of school students in a middle-class school from Belfast. But it progressed over time, with more and more students joining each month. And it became clear that, young people in Belfast, but also all across Ireland, are ready to demand an end to the climate crisis. At the Earth Strike in September, we've seen 4,000 people, or over 4,000 people, on the streets of Belfast at the march, which for Belfast is fantastic turnout. We've also seen amazing strikes in other areas across the north with a great turnout in Omagh, which comparative to Belfast is a very small town, but this was organised in a fantastic way and was helped by our comrades in the Omagh Socialist Party. One very inspiring thing that we also seen here in Belfast, was striking UTU workers from the two universities in Belfast coming down to send their solidarity to one of the recent climate strikes. At our intervention, we handed out leaflets, we sold papers, we engaged in conversations with people who were attending the strikes. And to be honest, we were the only real force building for the strikes on the ground. We had regular stalls, leafleting sessions, etc. And the core leadership of the movement really relied heavily on word of mouth and social media advertising, which just wasn't effective as it needed to be to build the movement to as large as it can be and had the potential to be. Personally, I had the chance to speak at a number of the actions, raising points that we need a socialist alternative and what the solution to the climate crisis is, which I'll get into a bit more, and I'm sure other speakers will as well. One of our interventions, also we had a comrade from our Belgian section, she came over to Belfast to speak at one of the strikes in April. And we held a workshop type meeting afterwards in how and our sister organisation in Belgium helped build a very successful action in her school. And also we drew out the needs for socialist politics in the movement and the proper organising methods to succeed. In our material and interventions, we raised points such as the need for free public transport, a socialist alternative being needed, and a link up for the climate movement and the workers' movement was integral for either to succeed. And obviously, clearly the movement has a massive potential and it is badly needed. As a report found out that we only have 10 years left to take radical action before we reach the point of no return in regards to the effects of climate change. But as socialists, we have encountered a few challenges. The main challenge that we encountered was the apolitical and sort of anti-party mood which the strikes had at the beginning. This was due to the leadership of the movement being quite middle class and also quite inexperienced in organising actions as well. We then seen the leadership taking a turn towards the Green Party here in the north, even going so far as to not let myself, not attend a meeting with the co-leader of the Green Party due to me being a member of the Socialist Party, Then they took a full turn to whenever the strikes began to pick up some traction, began inviting members of, all political parties to speak at the strikes. Members of Sinn Féin, the Ulster Unionist Party, the Social Democratic and Labour Party and Alliance, and obviously the Greens all speaking at strike over time. All of these parties, bar the Green Party, have consistently voted through Tory austerity in the Northern Ireland Assembly and have also done absolutely nothing on the councils to push through any positive proposals. And, when we did get a chance to speak at the strikes, we made these points and, called out the hypocrisy of the politicians speaking whilst doing nothing to actually take any action on climate change. We did have difficulty getting the demand for linking up with trade unions sort of up and running. At a workshop event, I raised the points as to why it is important, only to be followed by someone speaking on the importance of getting businesses on the side of the movement. But, as I mentioned, UCU workers came down whilst on strike to send their support. So it's clear that workers recognise that, the climate struggle is their struggle as well. But when this demand was eventually picked up and the unions were contacted, we've seen support rolling in from different unions. I've seen many different union members carrying their own union flags on the September March, such as Unite the Union, NIPSA, which is the largest public service union in the north, and the INTO teaching union, among a number of others as well. And obviously it was amazing that the climate strike movement, managed to get thousands of people out in the streets of Belfast, which is only matched and beaten by May Day and Pride events. But, personally, I think, stopping at a protest on a march isn't enough. What we've seen here in Belfast is a lackadaisical leadership, which has a passionate, militant and energized movement behind them. It's clear that working class and young people, want more action on climate change and want to take more radical action. Personally, I've had great conversations with many students on strikes about, where the movement needs to go, and the once monthly strikes simply just aren't enough. The climate movement, not only in Belfast, but also internationally, has been inspiring and an incredibly positive development that shows the potential for mass movements to emerge around the issue of the climate crisis. But what's needed for the movement is a strong leadership which takes bold initiatives and doesn't limit itself to monthly protests. Linking up with the trade unions is also needed. In the north, Unite and the GMB represent the Harland woodworkers, who in the summer had a struggle against their workers or their bosses in the shipyards, who were trying to close down the yard and put hundreds of workers out of jobs. But through their occupation of the shipyard gates and taking control of the shipyard, they managed to defend their jobs. And these workers actually raised the fact that their skills are able to help a transition towards the green energy sector. And we're proposing this as one of the things that they take up going forward whenever they reopened eventually. We need a strong movement which takes up socialist politics, demanding a socialist planned economy where workers are controlling each section of the economy. Because if one thing the COVID-19 crisis has shown us, it is that workers are the people who control society and know what is needed for society. We've seen workers all over the world walking out of factories and demanding that their resources and skills be used to produce PPE, ventilators, and in some cases alcohol hand sanitizer as well, and winning battles because they see where their skills are needed and where they need to go. Climate change is still going to be a thing, even though we're in the midst of another crisis. Recently there was an online climate strike, which was a fantastic idea, and it's clear that we can't let action fall by the wayside. Coming out of COVID-19, it is very possible that governments will use the excuse of having to restabilize the economy in order to ignore any pressure from movements demanding a green transition to a green energy sector. We need to be prepared coming out of this crisis to fight back against this, but also against the austerity and rampant neoliberalism that will most likely follow this crisis, due to governments trying to foot the bill of action taken due to the COVID-19 crisis onto the working class. The fight against the climate crisis is the same fight against austerity, against oppression, and against capitalism. It's clear that capitalism is to blame, and a mass movement demanding a socialist society is what is needed to solve the climate crisis, COVID-19, and all forms of oppression. So I'll just leave it there and let the other speakers come in now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. That was very, very interesting. It's always really, really great to hear from our members around the world and seeing that we're all in this together for real, unlike what's been said about the coronavirus. Now, to everyone who's just joined us, we're very, very excited to welcome you. Please like, comment, share, start watch parties, do anything that you can so we can get as many people as possible. Now, next up, we've got Sam, who will speak about the role of the unions in fighting against climate change.
Thanks very much, Yara. So my name's Sam Moorcroft. I'm a branch officer for the UCU and vice president of my local trades council, Sheffield Trades Council. And I'm really pleased to have been invited to speak here tonight. And thanks very much to Peter as well from the report from Belfast. Really appreciate that, very important. For me, speaking as a trade unionist, I think there are three really important things to say about the recent climate strikes. And the first thing is that the incredibly inspiring militancy and enthusiasm that is really in evidence on all of the protests. I was privileged to bring solidarity greetings from Sheffield Trades Council at one of the very first climate strike marches in Sheffield. Just the enthusiasm, the energy of the school strikers was just incredible. It was a really amazing experience. Sometimes you get sent to go and give solidarity greetings to a march and it's not quite that energetic, but these have been really incredible, and they've really lifted the heads of workers everywhere. They really put climate change on the agenda, and it's inspiring for trade unionists to see this from young people. Just one of the effects, for example, of that is that there's been a huge increase in my union of people demanding that they have a climate change rep or a green rep or an environmental rep in their UCU branch. And there's been so many people wanting to become climate reps or green reps that we're actually looking at UCU now whether we need some kind of national network to bring all these climate reps together who are putting demands on their employers in their workplace about how we tackle climate change. So the militancy, the energy has been incredible. But I want to make clear that it's not just militancy and energy on its own. The second thing that I find really important is the clear political understanding, the consciousness that's very much on display from all the young people there. It's very evident, it's very clear, and the school strikers are very clear that they recognise the reactionary role of the Tory government. They know that the Tories have spent the last 10 years attacking working class people, brutal austerity measures, and they know that there's going to be no solution to climate change on the basis of the Tories. They recognise, for example, the potential that could have been realised by a radical left government led by Jeremy Corbyn. And perhaps most importantly of all, the third thing is that these school strikers recognise the need to go beyond simply protest. They're not calling these climate protests. These are climate strikes. They're walking out of their schools and they're shutting their schools down, which I think is incredible. And particularly because whenever I speak to school strikers, it's really clear that they have an instinctive desire to broaden the strikes beyond students to workers as well. They understand completely the power that workers can have when they take strike action together. And that for me is amazing. And I think that's, at the moment with the coronavirus crisis, it really brings home the fact that it's workers who make the world go round. It's workers who make everything happen. Yara made the point right at the start that, it's for them, for the bosses, it's about profit. Why aren't they interested in solving the climate change crisis? Because they're more interested in protecting their profits. But it's workers who create those profits. And right now, in the middle of the pandemic, because workers or huge sections of the workforce aren't going out to work, that means the economy is grinding to a halt. And that shows the enormous power that working class people have. Just imagine if you had large sections of the working class going out on strike, demanding radical transformation of our society, of our economy to deal with the climate crisis. That would be an incredibly powerful statement. I think it's so amazing that so many of the school strikers recognise that that's the next step, if you like, that's what's needed. Now, in UCU, we found the school strikes amazing, been really inspiring. And we understand that we need to go beyond simply, of course, we're doing things locally like providing money, providing resources, providing equipment, helping to organise demonstrations to the school strikers, but we need to go beyond that. And I'm really pleased to say that last year at the UCU Annual Democratic Congress, we passed a motion which we sent to the Trades Union Congress as well, calling to organise joint strike action alongside the school strikers. So we could have students and workers striking together to change the system, to fight for a different kind of society, to fight to deal with the climate crisis. And I'm pleased to say, although it got watered down just a little bit between our conference floor and the TUC Congress, that motion did go to TUC Congress. It was passed. And that's why the TUC organised a lunchtime walkout in solidarity with the climate strikes last year to coincide with the climate strikes. But we haven't stopped there in UCU. We've also, obviously, as many people will know, we've taken 22 days of strike action this academic year in the higher education sector against cuts to our pension, against attacks on our pay, terms and conditions. And we've been very consciously, whenever we've been out on strike, we've done our best to marry those up and have them on the same day as the climate strike so that we can strike and march together with those school students. Because of course we're striking for better terms and conditions in our workplace, but we're striking really for a better world as well. And it's been, I think, some of the most amazing strike rallies that I've ever been on are the ones that we've jointly organised with school strikers in Sheffield. It's been amazing to strike and march alongside of them. Now, of course, though, we need to go beyond this. This is a good start, but it's just the beginning, if you like, of what's needed. The trade union movement, I think, has a massive duty to respond to, what the school strikers are doing. They've really put out a call for us to get our act together, to get organised, and to join them on the streets, to join them in walking out of our workplaces up and down the country. And therefore, I think we've got a duty to build generalised industrial action as part of this campaign. The school strikers are asking for our help. If you like, the next generation of trade unionists is looking to us for support. We've got to make sure that we answer that call. Now, of course, the biggest obstacle to that is the Tory anti-union laws, as we all know. Again, because of how powerful potentially the organised working class can be, the Tories have brought in draconian anti-union legislation to make it more difficult for us to take strike action. Now, some of that includes things like massive turnout thresholds and strike ballots. Those aren't insurmountable, and I'm pleased to say that in UCU we have overcome those on more than one occasion. We've been able to deliver national industrial action despite the Tory anti-union laws. But there's also other anti-union laws that prevent, for example, workers going on strike over an issue that doesn't relate directly to their workplace. So theoretically, at least, if we were to ballot and have strike action as part of the climate strike, that would technically be illegal. And that's a huge problem for us. And I think particularly at the moment, in the middle of this coronavirus crisis, we can see just how pernicious those anti-union laws, when you think there are unscrupulous employers at the moment putting their employees at risk, trying to cut back on pay, leaving people without income. But of course, in this crisis, it's very difficult to organise a legal strike ballot that will meet all the conditions of the anti-union laws. So I think that is just yet another reminder of how important it is for the trade union movement to organise, develop a strategy to beat these laws. We're going to have to start to talk about at what point do we break these laws together in sufficient numbers that we can build a campaign to win. And of course, one of the chief reasons that we should break those anti-union laws and we need to get rid of those anti-union laws is so that we can respond to the call that's been put out by school strikers and organise generalised industrial action to stop climate change and to bring about system change. Now, the reason that it's so important for working class people everywhere is because just like with this coronavirus crisis, just like with the financial crisis in 2008, we know it's going to be workers, it's going to be the working class who will be made to bear the cost of this crisis, just like crises in the past. And of course, we know that climate change will be exactly the same. All the detrimental effects, the damaging effects on the environment, the rich, if we let them, will be able to buy their way out of that. We will feel the brunt of everything that comes with that. And that's why we absolutely need to be part of this movement and to take on our responsibilities, if you like, as the trade union movement, as the organised working class. Now, the school strikers have rightly pointed out that what we need is system change. And that's absolutely true. There's no way that you're going to solve the climate crisis on the basis of this rotten and decrepit capitalist system. But the change that we need, I believe, is socialist change. We need to create a society and economy which is based on the needs of the many and not the profits of a few. And it's the working class, the organised working class, who are capable of delivering that. So I think it's hugely important that we fight in our unions to link up with the school strikers. I want all of the school strikers out there to know that there are rank and file trade unionists up and down the country in UCU and in other unions who are fighting alongside you, who are with you and who are inspired by you. I think I'll leave it there and listen to what the other speakers have to say. Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Sam, for this very important contribution. It's very clear to everyone, I think, that the trade unions have this crucial role to play, and it's really good that members of the unions are fighting for it and for the unions to connect to that too. It's a great message of solidarity to students and school students as well. Now, I think this will be a good time to launch our new photo protest. So as everyone here is aware, we can't really go out on the streets and demonstrate anymore. That's why we had to host this assembly online. But that doesn't mean that we can't protest anymore. We've prepared a poster that people can use. You can see it on the screen now. And you just print it out, post it online with the hashtag change the system. Don't forget to tag us on Facebook or Instagram. You can find the poster down the comments, but if you don't have a printer, don't worry about it. You can just write it down yourself. We're looking forward to seeing all of your photos. We just aren't done striking for the climate until there's real system change. And like Sam said, it has to be socialist change too. Now, our next speaker will be Kat. As Kat is based in Australia, where the time right now is 3 AM, Kate has sent us a pre-recorded video of a contribution. So let's hear from Kat. Just bear with us for a couple of seconds while we put it up.
Hi, my name's Kat and I am talking to you all the way from Melbourne in Australia. I am a student teacher, a hospitality worker, and I'm also a member of the International Socialist Alternative. Here in Australia, we are called Socialist Action, and we produce a magazine called The Socialist. This is one of our editions from last year that we produced during the big climate movement that happened. But obviously the first thing that comes to mind these days when you think of Australia and the climate is the devastating bushfire season that we have just been through. With all the COVID-19 pandemic things happening, it seems like almost a lifetime ago, but unfortunately for those people that were affected, They are still rebuilding their lives, and the damage is still ongoing. So obviously, people will know that the damage was on a scale that's never been seen before, while bushfires in Australia are normal and a natural part of the landscape. The intensity, the frequency, and the spread has all increased, and that is being linked to climate change. Even our Prime Minister, who brought lumps of coal into Parliament, was forced to acknowledge that climate change has made bushfires worse. So it was obviously a horrific time for us here in Australia. People would have seen the images of kangaroos fleeing from the fires, people literally hiding in the water from the fires coming towards them, red skies as well. And a new feature that we had to deal with was air pollution. Even though the bushfires were hundreds of kilometres away from us here in Melbourne, we had to wear masks when we were going down the street. Obviously, we're all wearing masks now, but for different reasons. So to see this in Australia in 2020 was quite confronting, and an aspect that we haven't had to deal with before. And it became a health and safety issue for workers, and some sites were shut down because of the air pollution. There was some action taken by workers because it was not safe to continue operating with some of the worst air quality in the world. So we attended the Bushfire Rallies in January in Australia, in Melbourne predominantly. We intervened with some of our similar material that we've been using in the climate movement and the anti-Adani movement over the last few years as well. We said that we need to smash this system that's wrecking the planet, that we need to fund the firefighters, not the fossil fuel companies, because the Australian government gives out $29 billion per year in subsidies to fossil fuel companies. That is just a staggering amount of wealth that could not only be invested into a properly, fully funded fire service so that people aren't forced to volunteer to save their communities, but it could also go into other things like healthcare. As we've seen with this pandemic, healthcare is vastly underfunded as well. We've been calling for genuine disaster relief so that people can actually get by. There were stories of families living in their cars, people not getting money from the government when they were eligible for it. It was a total horror story here. So we were also calling for a Green New Deal, and what we mean by that is obviously with workers in control of that. And that means transitioning to 100% renewable energy immediately, guaranteeing all workers jobs and actually creating jobs. And workers need to have a say in how these projects are run, whether it be public transport, whether it be solar panels, whether it be wind farms. Democracy is key in that Green New Deal. We also called for students and workers to strike together because, as I mentioned, the air pollution was a new feature of the bushfires, and the students have been leading the charge in the climate movement in the past year, and we think it would be really a strong show of power if the students and workers could come together in a big protest movement and really, bring the economy to a grind, just to show the establishment that we know that we're the ones that actually make this country run, and we're not happy about this. Climate change is the #1 concern of Australians prior to the COVID-19 epidemic, and urgent action needs to be done. The majority of Australians agree on this. So prior to the bushfire rallies, there was obviously the student strike movements, and there was a big anti-system mood. There were a lot of anti-system banners that we saw. We went with our banner as well, which says "Fight Capitalism, Fight Climate Change." Maybe the other way around, sorry. But we had a big positive response to that. People were saying, yes, we need to change the system, and we needed to explain what that system was. And that system is capitalism. And capitalism puts profit before all else. We've seen this with the bushfires. We've seen this with the environment in general. And now we're seeing it with our lives and our health with the COVID-19 pandemic. Capitalism is a chaotic system that puts profit before all else. Some of our most popular badges were capitalism is destroying the planet, planet before profit, system change, not climate change, and even socialist change, not climate change, is starting to be taken up by some people. And it's opening up a real discussion about another world that's possible, a world where we get to make the decisions, where we get to choose the future that we want to live in, especially for young people. This is so important. We're already seeing the effects of climate change in the here and now. This isn't a fight just for the future. This is a fight for now as well. And so we need to get organised now. And the climate movement needs to stop begging the leaders of the major parties in all countries, because nothing's going to be given to us from the kindness of these people's hearts. We're going to have to fight tooth and nail for any kind of change under this system, but ultimately we need to fight to overthrow this system, to have that kind of society that I was talking about, a democratically planned society that puts the needs of people and the planet first. And that society is socialism. And so because capitalism is a global system, requires a global fight back, and that's what we're trying to do here in the International Socialist Alternative. I actually was in Berlin when the biggest climate strike day happened in Melbourne. There were 150,000 people. So I woke up in Berlin and it was the afternoon in Melbourne, and it was amazing to see the energy and the dynamism and how excited people were about our slogans and our demands about smashing this system that's wrecking the planet. And then I got to go and participate in one of the biggest demos in Berlin and in all of Germany for decades, and the energy was just amazing, and it just really showed this is such an international fight. Our slogans were very similar, obviously tailored more specifically to the German situation, which is a bit further ahead of Australia in terms of renewable energy and in terms of the climate strikes as well. But yeah, the fight is international and we urge you to get involved. We're Socialist Action here in Australia. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you so much, Kat. That was very, very interesting. And obviously this, like the situation in Australia really highlights the dangers of climate change and shows us, like Kat said, how we truly need an international fight back. It's not enough just to do it in one country. Now, in order to do that properly, though, organizations that are truly dedicated to fighting climate change and the capitalist system as a whole have to have some funds. Now, we need to purchase software for assemblies like these, as well as hardware and equipment. We need to pay our organizers. We need to spend money on creating and printing our materials. And these are just a few examples of the expenses an organization like ours incurs. So, because we're not backed by any rich capitalists, we rely on donations from people like us, like you, who agree with us. So if you like what you hear today and you understand the urgency of organizing against the capitalist system, like we've been speaking about today, please consider donating anything. Every penny helps us build. Now, our last speaker today will be Connor, who will try to connect all of those interesting things that we've just heard and suggest what the next steps should be. So Connor, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I think obviously right now it's clear that the focus for a lot of capitalist governments around the world is the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. But that doesn't mean the problem of climate change has gone away. In fact, it's still a really pressing issue. And I think people can see that, and there's clearly a mood to fight back. There's the digital climate strike that Peter talked about at the start. There was a demonstration done in Hamburg today where youth strikers put their signs in the middle of the city, obviously would have been on a demonstration. on a march with those signs, but they were left there on the floor in quite a striking display. And also, you know, the people who are tuning in today and the struggles that we've heard of, you know, people are still looking to fight back against this crisis. But obviously, at the moment, we can't talk about winning the fight against climate change or anything else for that matter right now without talking about, you know, its relation to this pandemic. So we've heard about the effects it's had on the struggle, on organising and so on, but it's also important to discuss the way these two crises, the climate and the coronavirus, are related, and the system that actually underpins them both. I think, you know, we should state to start with that this pandemic isn't an act of God. It didn't fall from the sky. Its roots and its causes can be understood and studied, and we can see that it's something that was passed on to humans by animals, wild animals, and this is what scientists call a zoonotic disease. It likely came from bats, possibly with an intermediate host, which is an important point because it's actually the same story with 6 different epidemics in the last 26 years, including SARS and MERS, both kind of related to the coronavirus, and also Ebola, which has caused major problems in parts of the world recently. In the case of Ebola, actually, it's been linked very clearly to things like deforestation and the habitat destruction and urbanization that coincide with that, that have brought wild animals, livestock and humans into much closer contact, and that allowed the virus to jump between species and be passed on to humans. Likewise, with coronavirus, that was traced back to likely a what's called a wet market in Wuhan in China, where wild animals are brought from their natural habitats and then kept in close proximity together in conditions that often have poor hygiene and so on. And what they found is that in the wilds around that area, specifically in caves and so on, there's dozens of SARS-like viruses, coronavirus, that wild animals would be able to pick up. And then this market, these conditions, are the perfect environment for such a virus to jump between species and into humans. But despite these risks, and despite these dangers, businesses serve to make a lot of money selling these animals, and they're bought as a luxury only by the wealthiest in Chinese society. So really what underpins this is that food is being produced and is being sold with profit taking precedence over you know, safety and need of society. Similarly with Ebola, this deforestation is taking place in order to make room for mineral mining and oil extraction, driven by the endless pursuit of more profit and to consume more natural resources. So we can see that not these things that are damaging our environment are also actually the same things that are creating the new grounds for new outbreaks of epidemics and pandemics and so on. I think these kind of examples show what many socialists have talked about over the last century or so, about how environmental destruction often has long-term effects that aren't always immediately apparent. But not only this, is you know, climate change itself will encourage the spread of diseases too. So the Zika virus in 2015 was linked to rising temperatures, which helped the virus actually spread more easily. And it's for these kinds of reasons, these kind of factors, are why scientists are predicting that global diseases will become more common in our society. And also, I think it's clear that the question of how we fight against future pandemics is actually tied to and is really the same question as how do we fight against deforestation and climate change and so on. And I think, you know, it's not just us making these links there. Many people are starting to see the links between these issues. So we've seen the popularity that Kat was talking about slogans like system change, not climate change, and people understanding that climate change is a problem of the whole system rather than rather than just kind of small individual things. The statistic of 70% of greenhouse gas emissions coming from just 100 of the top corporations highlights that as well. That's been very, very popular and very often repeated on these demonstrations. And you know, it goes to show that individual changes in our lifestyles aren't going to be enough to solve this. We need to challenge these massive corporations that are responsible for the vast majority of climate change on a much broader basis. That's obviously not what the current system's doing. In fact, so we saw this oil crisis this week, where big oil companies have been bailed out now by the Trump government in the US at a time when we should be moving towards renewable energies. The system's propping up those fossil fuel companies and those major polluters. Of course, at the moment, with the lockdown, with businesses stopping activity and so on, the irony is that this pandemic's actually caused a drop in emissions and in CO2 levels. And the media's made a big deal out of this, but I think it's important to put it into some perspective. Because not only is this temporary, of course, these emissions are going to resume as the lockdown is lifted in the future, which means this isn't a fix, but also there's going to be efforts to roll back existing laws, as some of the speakers have already begun to touch on. But we can look at some of the recent news. The Confederation of European Businesses has been lobbying the EU to postpone all non-essential environmental regulations until after the pandemic. And in the US, the Trump administration's suspended the enforcement of environmental laws for the duration of the outbreak. So we've already seen these kind of moves taken on behalf of the interests of big business. And after the pandemic, as we go into the reality of this huge economic crisis we're entering, attempts are going to be made to boost profits of these businesses, even if it's at the expense of the planet. And I think we're very likely to see more examples like the ones that I mentioned. But why is this happening? Well, at its core, capitalism is a system that's based on constantly growing profits. And that means constantly increasing production, constantly increasing the consumption of the Earth's resources, in a way that's by its very nature not sustainable on a planet that's only got finite resources. For that reason, you know, although we support any reforms to protect the environment, as long as that capitalist system remains in place, we can't fundamentally solve this issue. The profit system pits production against nature. But we have to remember that humans aren't separate from nature. We aren't separate from the ecosystem, and damage to the ecosystem causes damage to humans in turn. And I think the great Marxist thinker of the 19th century, Friedrich Engels, said it very well when he said, each such conquest that we make over nature takes its revenge on us. And these wildfires that we've heard about in Australia, the coronavirus, are all striking examples of this, I think. So then the question becomes, how do we change this system? And Sam's really talked quite well about the power that the working class has. And the lockdown is a very good example of this, where the economy has been ground to a halt by workers not working. If that took place on an organised basis, in the form of a strike, as young people have led the way on, workers would have enormous power in helping to change this situation. And for that reason, it's important that workers continue to play a role in the struggle as they have done and joining the marches and so on in recent months. But also there's the need for unions and the organised working class to take a lead in this struggle and to give it the power that it needs to change this system. But also, we should talk about what we mean by system change. For us in Socialist Alternative, that means building a society that's based on needs rather than the profits of a tiny few, rather than the market chaos that's driven us towards this crisis, planned economy on a rational basis, on a democratic basis. But we can't control, we can't plan what we don't own. So that would mean public ownership of these giant corporations, the ones that are responsible for climate change, with workers' control and management over how they're run. And on that basis, they could be running on a sustainable basis according to need, but also workers would be able to democratically plan any transition to new jobs. At the moment, many of these businesses use jobs as a threat when they say, we can't go green because that would sacrifice the jobs of our workers. Well, that doesn't need to be the case. But on this basis, we can have massive research and investment into green technology and renewables. The wealth exists in society right now to do that immediately. But under capitalism, it's hoarded by and used for the super rich, rather than spending billions bailing out the oil companies. We could immediately transition to green energy, and mass public transport and so on. So 2 years ago, as Peter mentioned, this report came out from the IPCC with the UN saying we have 12 years to save the planet. Now that's closer to 10. And in Socialist Alternative, we're not prepared to let capitalist leaders use the coronavirus as an excuse to give us only 9 years, because we simply don't have the time. So we're an international organisation fighting for revolutionary change and for a socialist society. And if you agree with what you've heard today from all our speakers, we'd appeal to you to join us and fight for a better world. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Connor. These are some very thought-provoking points. Thank you to all of our brilliant speakers today, and of course, all of you watching. It's clear, I think, from today, but also generally, that we really need to organise together internationally, but also in our communities, to fight climate change. And as Connor said, it's really important that we do it in such an organised way. And we think that doing it with us, with Socialist Alternative, is the best way to do that. So please join us. Speaking of this, please like our page, follow us on Instagram. And if you want to hear more about us, go to our website, which is socialistalternative.net, for more information with some really good resources there. Now, before we go, I just wanted to remind you quickly about the photo protest that we're organising. Please use the poster that's in the comments, take a picture, use the hashtag change the system, and don't forget to tag Socialist Alternative. And if you want to see more of us, please consider using the link in the comments to donate anything from £1. We're already seeing some people in the comments saying that they've donated or going to donate, so thank you so much. It's unbelievably helpful to our activity. And just before you go, we'd also like to invite you to next week's rally, which is going to be International Workers' Day. This year, obviously, we can't march outside for May Day, but this doesn't mean that we're going to not mark this day. So we're going to do an online rally. Please click going in the event. It's going to be posted in the comments as well. And we're looking forward to seeing all of you. It's next Friday at 7 p.m. Hope to see all of you there, and have a wonderful weekend.